My name's Lisa. I'm with the AGP Office Administration, so just here helping to facilitate the session alongside John Sharples this morning. I'll pass you over to John in a moment. Just before we do, can I just go through a couple of housekeeping rules with you? Can you please just put your microphones on mute for the time being through the presentation, just to avoid any interference or background noise? There will be a question and answer session later in the webinar, at which point you can, of course, come back off your mute and ask questions. Or if you prefer, you can ask any questions using the chat facility, and John will try to answer as many of these at the end then. While we're on the chat facility, can I just ask you to pop your names into the chat thing, because some of you, your names are coming up, but some of them I've got telephone numbers or alias names on there. So if you could just pop your names in there so I know definitely who's on the webinar, that would be great. Thank you. If you need any support during the webinar, I'll be here to monitor the chat. So if there are any problems, please just ask. We are being recorded this morning just to collate any questions or comments which we may miss during the live webinar. Again, if you've any questions or concerns about this, please let me know. Following on from the webinar, I'll be sending you out 2 emails. One is that we require a digital signature from you for the Welsh Government. So I'll send this through to you via HelloSign with a link. It literally takes less than a minute, easy to follow, but we do need that back from you just to confirm to Welsh Government that the webinar took place and how many people attended. So it's really important that you sign this and send it back. There'll also be an email with a link to 2 surveys to provide feedback to us. One will be on the actual webinar this morning, and the other one will be about COVID-19. Obviously, if you've been on one of our webinars, you've already done the COVID-19, so you don't need to do that one again, but they'll be coming through to you. On that note, I shall hand you back over to John. So over to you, John.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join this morning. As Lisa mentioned, firstly about aliases. I appear to have an alias of Colin Williams. I know not why. It's the first time I've ever seen it. And also, as I speak, I'm having my words come up on the screen underneath me, which I find a little disturbing. Nevertheless, let's make a move through. But my name is John, it is not Colin. So the title of the session today, Selling in the New Normal. For me, when I was asked to do that, my thought was initially, well, what is the new normal? How do we define it? How long is it going to last? When will we start to feel that we're coming out of or changing whatever the new normal is? And the honest answer from me, and it's a relatively simple one, is that I don't know what the new normal is yet. I'm not sure that anybody else does. What I do know is that the world is a very different place now than it was 3 or 6 months ago, and I think it would be very difficult to imagine, although many weeks ago, how we would be and where we would be now. I think most people would have thought you were joking if you'd explained it. However, one thing that I do know is that whatever the new normal is today, or next week, or next month, it is going to change both regularly and rapidly, particularly as we start to either come out of lockdown, or if we're out of lockdown and there needs to be tactical lockdowns put in place for whatever reason. That therefore means that whatever we in business choose to do and how we do it, we need to remain flexible and certainly have contingency and plans put in place for as things change or develop. As with almost everything else, there are always opportunities in whatever scenario we find ourselves in. Regrettably, there are always losers, and I think we're seeing an awful lot of those at the moment. But there will also be people who are able to take advantage of this and will see the benefits and will grow their businesses. Hopefully, everybody on here today will be amongst that latter group. So what we need to think about is the sales strategy process and tools are going to have to evolve and adapt equally as quickly as the situation around us. This morning, for the next 3/4 of an hour to an hour, we're going to consider the implications across the sales spectrum. We're going to use PSP's sales process model as a reference point, and I'll just run through that very briefly. It's not an advert in any way, but it's going to just highlight the content of the next 45 minutes or so. One thing I would point out is I don't have a silver bullet. I don't have something that will work for everyone all of the time. They're just some thoughts, observations, and things that we have noted in our work with other sales organizations across the world, and things that we've seen working. Today we'll be talking primarily business to both business and large business to customer, so direct customers. Less commodity sales, more about solution selling. So let's make a start. Historically, sales has been a person-to-person or people-to-people role, and many salespeople will tell you that they do things by instinct. I might disagree slightly with that, but generally speaking, it has been face-to-face. Certainly for us in the UK. I'll come back to that later. This model's been changing gradually, albeit slowly, and I've been involved in technology and technology sales for some 30 odd years, and I can remember going back 15, 20 years when we first started talking about video conferencing, which will kill off all need to travel. I think clearly up until 3 months ago that hadn't happened, although there are a lot of companies that do use it extensively now. But I do feel, and I will make the point on a regular basis throughout the next 45 minutes or so, that recent events have probably accelerated that process extremely quickly. So I referenced the context that we're going to do. I'm talking about the sales reference model. Just as a quick guide to where things we'll cover, we'll start through lead generation. We'll talk a little bit about the qualification process, how the impact will work on developing or retaining key client or prospect relationships, so how to develop the relationships, how you're going to focus on demonstrating value to your clients or future clients, a little bit about solutioning and pricing the impact and how you're going to need to focus a bit on that. I think one of the key areas will be how you propose and present, which I think will be very different. Focus for a couple of minutes on deal capture planning or close planning. And then how do you find out why you won or why you lost even, and how do you feed those lessons back into the loop? So, a little bit more context. I think you will all recognise quite a number of the logos on screen. If I was sitting in a room with you now, I'd just sort of pause for a minute and ask what you feel they have in common, apart from being well-known logos and probably most of them known across the world. The answer in terms of what they have in common goes back to, in fact, the conversation Lisa and I were having as you were joining the call. If we take Twitter as an example, they have announced what they call a work from home policy forever. So that is, their staff have the ability now to work from home as opposed to going into an office. And no, Lisa, that's not a hint for you to jump ship and try and join Twitter. But they have announced a policy that their staff can work from home forever. Google and Facebook in the UK and the USA have a work from home policy until 2021 at least, and they've stressed at least. Similarly, Microsoft, Sky, Amazon, BT's 8,500 call centre staff now work remotely. And a survey of those staff said 65% want to continue to do so after the pandemic. MasterCard staff can work from home until ready to go back. In other words, until they feel comfortable to go back into an office. Those are all interesting, but they're large organisations. I think there's a couple of names on there. University of Cambridge have stated that for the academic year 2021, so starting in September, all of their lectures will be online. In other words, as a student, there is no longer any need to attend campus. I did have a feeling about that and wondered how many students are going to be really keen to avoid the 3 years of fun and games that go in with campus, but that's another discussion completely. Perhaps more tellingly, Barclays, who I know, we all know about Barclays, but recently, or in fact just last month, the chief exec of Barclays, Jess Staley, and I'll quote you what he said, and that's that there would be a long-term adjustment to our location strategy because of the pandemic. The notion of putting 7,000 people in the building may be a thing of the past. And I think that's possibly one of the most telling things that could be said. What does that actually mean, though, for us in the world of sales? Well, I put this up laughingly, but I think in simple terms, it means the opportunity to meet your customers or prospective customers on a face-to-face basis have become much more difficult, very much more difficult. They either don't want to, for fairly obvious reasons, or they're not in an office, either singularly, i.e., for a one-to-one meeting, or as a team. They could actually be anywhere, almost anywhere in the world, actually. If I go back to Barclays as an organisation I sort of know, in days gone by, it was actually relatively simple to see a number of people in one morning. You just went down to their offices in London, Canary Wharf, and you could go up and down the elevator, or in UK terms, the lift, and you would find the people that you wanted because there were thousands in the same building. So it was very efficient in terms of being able to maximize your time in one building. That now will not be the case. And for a lot of salespeople who will, as I said, swear blind that selling is done by the seat of the pants, it's face-to-face, it's instinctive, they're going to have to need to find a different way. And that's where we're going to focus for the next sort of 40 odd minutes or so. And I think this actually becomes the fundamental challenge throughout the sales process. So we start at the beginning of the loop that I went through earlier on, lead generation. I wonder how many of you remember these things: exhibitions, shows, even conferences, and how much effort and time over years has been put into attending these as a source of not just leads, but also promoting your business to a wider audience. As I mentioned at the start, I've been talking to various people that I've got contacts with, two of whom are very senior in the world of organising exhibitions or creating the stands that go there, working for very large corporates. Both of those individuals are telling me at this moment they have no business, none, in the foreseeable future, which looks to me as though the opportunity to generate leads through exhibitions has probably disappeared, certainly for the foreseeable future. And speaking personally, I would not go to an exhibition or a face-to-face conference at the moment, just wouldn't take the risk. Those were the good old days, I suppose, and how many of us would go to an exhibition or conference? I'm not sure. Having said that, that means marketing will need to evolve. Fortunately, and most marketing people will be pleased to hear this, It's our belief that they are and have been ahead of the curve, not necessarily because they could see a pandemic coming, but simply because they've been looking at alternative ways of marketing and generating business. So if we look at lead generation, our traditional area of lead generation has been talking in 4 direct, we call it bubbles, one of which, top left, digital marketing, we feel is going to become even more important now than it ever was previously. And I think that's going to be the area that probably takes the strain from, or takes up the slack left by the exhibition world. A great deal of marketing is done digitally, as we would know. However, it's not the only way to acquire business, and we would suggest that organizations look and focus in some respects on perhaps the more traditional methods, go a bit old school in some respects. And we've put in advertising. Now, advertising, of course, can be fairly closely linked to digital marketing through, for instance, Google and 2 of the other paid for search engines. There is more than one, I believe. But advertising, maybe through local press, through industry-specific journals, may have a renaissance, and it might be worth looking at that in more detail and focusing on how you blend digital with some of the old school advertising to generate the business that perhaps may have come from attending exhibitions or conferences. Direct marketing is an interesting area, and a lot of people will say direct marketing is great. You just sit yourself down with a phone and a list of names of contacts. I have to say I'm less inclined to do that or recommend it. However, I was talking to a sales exec, a fairly young sales exec last week about this, and he actually said that that's one of the things that he does and has been doing over the course of the last 6 to 8 weeks. He's not been furloughed. He works for a technology company, and he said it does work, but firstly, a lot of the phone numbers that he has on contact lists now are office based, and of course people are not always there, or the phones are now diverted elsewhere. The comment he did make was that some of the numbers he have, for some reason, are now going through to people's home or personal mobile numbers, and that can prove difficult. So I put a little bit of caution on there, but direct marketing again may take up some of that slack. And likewise, public relations, I think, will become a more important part. And I'm going to focus on that for 30 seconds or so and say that there is one big area missing on this, which again, if I take this slide and do it in a face-to-face environment, I would ask people to have a look at it and tell me what's missing. And the answer is actually fairly straightforward, and that is references. It's asking your existing client base to make recommendations for you. We've always found them to be the best source of well-qualified leads, particularly when people put their hand up either in private or publicly and say, this company have done a great job for us. We would thoroughly recommend them to anybody that is looking for this particular type of service. That, I think, might be an area that is worth now focusing a great deal of effort on, is to look at your existing client base, if you're fortunate to have one, find out how people are reacting to the services or products you provide, and focus on asking them who else could use the service, and look to get some form of publicly referenceable quotes from them that can be included in your proposals, or in fact in any of your advertising or public relations. I think one of the key areas for digital marketing, and the reason why, is it tends to be a quicker transition to digital marketing. Also, results appear to come through far quicker as well. Of course, the one area that I'm going to pull forward now as a sort of final point on marketing is exactly what we're doing today, is the use of webinars. I suppose historically attended very few webinars, simply because I was actually doing face-to-face work with people. Over the last few weeks, I've started to become a little bit of a fan of them where they are appropriate. And I think if you can find a way of putting together interesting content that is relevant to your audience, you will find you get attendees more than you had thought, because it is actually relatively simple for people to join from wherever they happen to be in the world, whether they're in their office, and for most people, their office actually will be their home. So I would absolutely encourage people to start to focus on maybe webinars and linking webinars into maybe looking at your existing client base and seeing if there's an existing client who would like to participate with you and talk to some other focused individuals. It's a thought. Having acquired leads, some marketing people will say they are qualified, others would say no, they're simply suspects. They're people who've expressed an interest. You then move on to the focus or the task of qualification. Now, the slide that I've got on now looks to be a busy slide, but there are many types of qualification, many different techniques. Those of us who've been in sales for a number of years will have been exposed to so many of them. Most of them have an acronym, BANT, which is budget, authority, need, timescale. The one that I've put on screen there, if you look down the left-hand side, the attributes, solution, competition, originality, timescales, etc., spells out Scotsman. It's one that we quite like, but it's not the only one on the market, and it's not necessarily the best for all particular types of sale, particularly the quick types of sale. If you want something simple, BANT is as good as anything. However, if you look along the top right, you'll see meeting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The keyword there being meeting. Qualification and the process, and if we're honest, most professional salespeople use some form of rigorous qualification process. Whether they admit it or not, they do use it. It has now become more important than ever to understand what is good or bad business, what can be won and what cannot. The key focus and the reason why is to ensure that you invest your time and money, time is always money, at pursuing pieces of business that you can win. One of the benefits of the current situation and the move to more remote working, I believe, is that your opportunity to sell historically may have been based on your geographic location, might have been based on where you were going to or were prepared to invest in putting a salesperson, how much you were prepared to spend on their travel. And it might well be that you say, no, historically we've been based in Cardiff and our area that we will sell to is Wales. It might be the M4 corridor. It might have been the south of England up until the Midlands. If somebody came from Newcastle, we didn't touch Newcastle, for instance. It's my belief that moving to a new digital sales model will actually facilitate the ability to sell to a much bigger geographic location. I will come back to that because I think it's a huge opportunity, particularly for smaller businesses, to take a big step in their ability to sell to a wider audience. However, qualification is really important. And it was always important to ask the appropriate person the right question and to be able to judge the answers mainly on their body language. In other words, I'm going to ask a difficult question of a particular prospect, and if I believe the answer based on their body language, I'll start to think that they are serious buyers. That's going to be more difficult because, as I mentioned earlier, I think an awful lot of people will no longer be in an office and they will not be available for face-to-face meetings, in other words, sat across a desk. And that places a slightly different emphasis on how you qualify sales opportunities. There are 2 or 3 answers to it, which I'll give fairly quickly. The first is to understand their business, their markets, their issues and their opportunities almost as well as they do. In other words, you can have an intelligent conversation with them, which involves you giving information and parting with knowledge rather than simply asking questions, some of which they might feel you should know the answer to. I would take that a step further. Understand who their competitors are and who yours are as well, so that you can see and feel what's happening in the broader marketplace. If you do that successfully, you then have or should have a very clear set of intelligent questions that will give you unambiguous answers against each of the attributes. In other words, who are you competing against? Who are they competing against? What are their timescales? Who's going to make the decision? What's the affordability envelope? In other words, how much budget has been allocated to this and against what? Is it capital? Is it revenue budgets? Why do you need it? What's the compelling event? And what's driving that compelling event? The big question, of course, is how are you going to ask them that? And the answer now has become relatively straightforward. And that's probably in exactly the same way that we are talking today, to be through some form of conference facility, whether it's video conference or whether it's a phone call. And it's to be the ability to look people in the eye, at least on a Zoom call, and try and establish exactly what their answer is, not based on the words that are coming out, but sometimes based on their body language. And I guess many of us will have been on the wonderful quiz calls. Certainly I have been on, I don't know how many quizzes over the last 6 or 8 weeks. And I've learned much more about how to listen as opposed to talk, and how to look as opposed to talk. In other words, focusing much more on the old adage of having 2 ears and 1 mouth and using them in that proportion. It's a skill that requires honing. I will come back to it in a bit more detail, but technology is going to be really important as we move forward over the next, I don't know how long. It could be 3 months, 6 months, I suspect. And certainly the conversations I've had, and as I said, I spoke with the CEO of the Institute of Biomedical Science, president of the American Chemical Society, and actually several other very senior business leaders. And the gist of their message was, John, we have recently invested a lot of money in equipping our staff with the technology and the security to work remotely. Remotely can be home, it could be at your local Starbucks if any of them are actually open. But we've invested a lot of money in it. We are not going to go back to giving them that technology and then saying, by the way, please come back into the office. Oh, and that office space that we had, we're going to have to double or triple the size of it to maintain social distancing rules. That won't happen. They've spent a lot of money. They're not going to waste it. So I suspect that the model we have now with people working from home is going to certainly continue for some considerable period of time, if not forever. In other words, we've had that compelling event and video conferencing, it has now become the norm. One final thought on qualification. Please do remember that qualification is an ongoing process. You don't qualify an opportunity on day one and think to yourself, that's it, it's a potential client. If something happens, you need to re-qualify and ensure that you're still on track and that you're still talking to the right people and that they have the right motivation to buy from you. We move on from qualification. Perhaps along with how you propose and present, the most difficult thing now is going to be about relationships. How do you develop and maintain relationships with a disparate group of people, and how do you get information back from them? A good salesperson will tell you that their relationships are based on meeting being able to go into an office, sit down, have a talk. Some call it the coffee machine syndrome. In other words, you can just go to the coffee machine, have a chat with various people. We don't see that coming back anytime soon. A lot of other people will tell you that relationships have been developed over the course of, I'm going to call them social events. Let's just say the invitation to Twickenham or Cardiff Arms Park or wherever to go to a sporting event. Likewise, I think sporting events may come back. I'm not sure that we're going to see the immediate reinstatement of the hospitality industry. I suspect that's a way off yet. So relationships are going to be difficult to develop. Again, going back to just some real life examples, I was talking last week to a very successful sales executive in Florida. I was asking him, he's a fairly young guy, probably early 30s maybe. And the reason I say that is I think part of the issues now are generational based, if I'm honest. I was asking him how he copes, because he was just saying to me that his geographic sales territory is not just Florida. Bear in mind, Florida is about as long as the whole of the UK. But he was saying that his territory is Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, I've just got to get this right, Georgia, Alabama, and Arkansas. In other words, it was vast. I mean, geographically, it's huge. And he was telling me that actually the recent events haven't made any real difference to him and the way he sells at all. He said for the last 4 years or so, he and their company have been using video technology, Skype calls he mentioned, and latterly Zoom, to develop relationships rather than getting on a flight. And he actually quoted me an example at the moment where he said that he is, as we speak, in the process of negotiating a $5 million contract with Walmart, who are based in Arkansas. This individual I was talking to is actually based on the coast in Florida. And he said he has not been to their office and he has not met any of the decision makers personally. It's all done on Zoom. Now, I don't know whether the UK is ready for that yet. I think we might have to be. I don't see a way around it at the moment. But I was talking to Douglas, as his name is, and asking him how he sorted out what I would call the influencers from the decision makers. How did he get him and the key members of his executive team to talk to the key executives in Walmart? Also asked him about how did he understand what the competitors were doing? Because I'd always recommend, and this is a bit old school, when you went into a reception area, if you could, just take time to look through the registration book and just see who was coming and going, because it was a very good signal. And he had a couple of answers, really, which I think, well, now I think about it, are fairly obvious, and there are things that we do. But he said, basically, a lot of it is, first of all, again, understanding your customers in detail. And by that, he said, he does a lot of research, an awful lot of research on his clients. He looks for their company reports if they're publicly quoted. He looks on their websites. He looks at the announcements they're making. He looks at the trade press, the journals. He tries to find out who and what type of people these companies are recruiting. He uses LinkedIn. He uses, there's another thing called BoardX. And he said, you know, there are so many different sources now of understanding what a company are doing and trying to pull together a picture of the executives, who are the people with influence in the business, who are the key members of the business, but likewise also the competitors. And he mentioned particularly relationships with competitors by looking at the individuals he's decided are the key players in an organization, looking at who they have relationships with. He's fairly quickly able to work out whether they are likely to be talking to and who they are talking to in terms of the competition. What he did say was, as I said, recent events have actually not changed the way he sells one jot, not a bit. because he did not get in a car and drive to see his customers in Arkansas or Georgia. He would occasionally, and he did mention that one of his key customers was Coca-Cola up in Atlanta, but he said he's only visited them twice. So I think that with a little adaptation, a little bit of thinking, and a lot more time spent researching, the model that some companies have used very successfully over recent years can be perhaps adapted a little, but can be brought to the UK and can work very well for us. Of course, having the relationships is one thing. You need to be able to express your value. In other words, what it is you're going to be putting forward to your clients as a potential solution, and the strategy for doing that is really important. So again, value for most people is expressed and should be in some form of value proposition that's compelling. It's got to be memorable and relevant, and I'll come back to the word relevant in a minute. It's got to demonstrate value and be differentiated from your competitors. So how do you do that? How do you pick those pieces up and make sure that in the new world, where you can't test them on a face-to-face basis before you put them forward as a complete proposition, the answers, I think, are, again, going back to a couple of points, and I'll be summarizing this at the end of the session. Firstly is know your customer. Know them very, very well. Do your research. What will help them, and to have an ability to quantify that, to express that in their language. In other words, make it relevant and in words that they understand, and addresses the key issues that they have, not what you would like it to be. In this instance, the clients are relatively unconcerned about you. What they want to know is, how are you going to fix their problems? And you need to ensure that if you've done, you will ensure if you've done your research, that you will be able to make that proposition relevant, memorable, compelling, and key, differentiated from your competitors, and demonstrate the value that they're looking to achieve. It's unlikely you're going to be able to do that face to face on a regular basis. I would caveat that and say, you know, in 12 months' time, we might all come back together, look through these slides and go, the world's a very different place. We can now go where we like, see who we like, and everybody's decided they want to go back to offices. I doubt it, but I would put that caveat in there. It goes back to what I said at the start, that this will be a changeable feast, a very movable one. If we look at how that value is created, first of all, creating the solution and understanding what the price needs to be has always been a challenge, unless of course you're doing a commodity sale. If you are selling something that is boxed and ready to sell, then it's what we call a commodity sale, and that generally is, how many are you buying? I will look at the price list, I'll look at how many you want to buy over a period of time, and we'll work some form of deal out. But working a solution, what the price needs to be is always interesting, certainly for us British. There are two definitions on screen at the moment, one in the orange box, one in the grey, and I always tend to sort of veer to the one on the grey. For me, it's always an uncomfortable conversation about price, and to achieve a satisfactory price. I'm in the process of starting to look at moving house, and I did actually go and visit a house yesterday, and when the price comes up, it's always, for me, because I'm not used to bartering, it's very difficult. But in commerce, price is basically determined by three things. It's what a buyer is willing to pay. And if your price is 100 and the buyer is only willing to pay 50, you're probably not likely to sell at 100. It then is predicated on what you're willing to accept. So if your 100 was, let's call it ambitious, and you knew you were prepared to accept 75, then that might be the price. The key element, the third one, though, is what the competition allows to be charged. The competition comes in at 25, your 100 or even your 75 will be difficult to achieve. How do you get to price? Well, part of that, of course, is understanding what the solution needs to be. And if you're in solution sales and that solution is built working jointly with your client, this becomes, again, a lot more difficult. I'll go back to talking about Douglas in Florida. He actually works in solution sales, and I was asking him, well, how have you dealt with this with Walmart? And his answer was, again, fairly simple. He said, it's technology. We've been using technology, latterly Microsoft Teams, I think he said. Again, there are other solutions on the market. I'm not advocating one more than the other. And he said that what we've been able to do is, instead of having my solution team go to the offices in Arkansas, my solutioning team have actually been based at their homes, and they've collaborated using tools and online technology. And he said it's been very, very successful. In fact, he said, we found it's saved us a great deal of money in terms of sending people, across the continent in terms of the United States, but also it's been a lot easier to get people together. Historically, getting 6 or 8 people in a meeting room to do a back and forth solution session, or in fact any others. He said it equally applied to the contract negotiations they're going through at the moment. So it's been very difficult to get those 6 or 8 people in one location, in a room at the same time. He said now it's actually a lot easier to do that, because as long as they've got an hour in their diary, it doesn't matter that they're not in the office in Arkansas. They can be sat in their home. They don't have to come in for that meeting, or they don't necessarily need to say, no, I've got another meeting somewhere else later on. So Douglas's view was, do you know what? Using technology and being quite smart about it has saved us money. It's made us more productive, and it's actually made the whole process smoother and quicker, which I found interesting. And when I think about his answer, I think it was actually right. And the challenge on solutioning pricing is, how do you identify what's required? What's essential versus what's nice to have? And how do you get that balance of the essentials versus the nice to have? How do you get that balance of functionality against the budget or price that your client is willing to pay? That is a difficult challenge at the best of times. My friend in the States said they've been much more successful than they thought he would be by using collaborative technology. So I don't see that that's necessarily going to be too much more difficult. It just takes a little thinking about. I will come back to the technology in a minute. Having got the right solution, for a lot of us, the key element was, how do we put together the proposal and how do we present that to the buyer or buyers? And more frequently now, and over the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen the advent of procurement teams. So people whose job it is to ensure that they drive the right solution and value out of the prospective supply base. What it's meant is that historically, where one person might be the key buyer, there are now, generally speaking, a team of people that you need to either influence or persuade, one of whom might still be the key individual, but there will be a number of others who will have input. Usually they don't have the ability to say yes, but they have the ability to say no. And our observation is, for every one person who can say yes, we find that there are 6 who actually can say no. And it's getting those people on board is the challenge. So 2 elements to this: the proposal and the presentation. Forgive me, I'm just going to stop for a glass of water. Right. So firstly, the proposal document, our belief, becomes even more important now than it ever was. Our view is that you will do well now to think about getting your documents checked by some form of independent person. That could be independent from the sales team or from the person who's doing the selling, so somebody within your organization. It could actually be that you ask external agencies to do that, but check the document to ensure that it's complete, yes, of course. It's compliant, in other words, it complies with the instructions you've been giving. But more importantly, that it is connected to your prospects' business problems or challenges or opportunities that they have, and that it is compelling and differentiated from what it is the competition might be putting forward. We believe that that's become much, much more important now. So that's something I think bears a little bit of focus on. The second element, and the one that I think will be radically different for many of us, is how do you present that in a formal basis? I'm sure those of us who've been selling for a number of years have done very, very many formal presentations to a team of people from the prospects, and that team will maybe consist of legal, commercial, technical, buying people, whoever. And the same could be said of your team. You might be there on your own. You might have 2 or 3 key people with you. But the issue now is that that presentation is unlikely to be done on a face-to-face basis now. Very unlikely, certainly for the foreseeable future. Therefore, we feel that those of us who've enjoyed the challenges of Zoom, Skype with multi-party participants are going to have to enjoy an awful lot more of them, because we feel that that's going to be the way forward. Again, going back to my colleague in the States, he said that was certainly something 2-3 years ago that he had to learn very quickly, how to use technology effectively. So the answer appears to be there: invest in that type of technology. More importantly, invest in the training on how to use it. Now, that's not only how to use the keys and to use the facilities, the functionality of the technology you're using, but also the presentation skills that go with it, the ability to stop, listen, look at people, and try and judge on the small screen what it is that they're thinking about and how they're reacting to what it is you're suggesting. And that's a real challenge. It's not a skill that I have the ability to say to people how to do it. I'm wholly unqualified for that, but there are some very, very good people out there. The view being, I think, that on these types of calls, certainly less is more. Less from me, more encouragement to listen to what it is that my prospects, the other people on the call, are saying. Again, talking to a salesperson in the UK actually this time, young, very young salesperson. I say very young. I'm considering less than 30 as very young nowadays. But he'd been selling 4 or 5 years, I think he said. And I said to him, well, how do you get about this? And he said for the last 3 or 4 years, he's been doing everything on using technology. He was surprised that a lot of selling was still done face to face. And that's what made me wonder whether this is as much a generational thing as a technology issue. I don't know. I'd make no comment on that. I'm going to move very quickly on to how you close or deal capture. We call it close planning. A close plan is simply a process, if you like, that businesses align their own sales process around the customer's buying process. So that's aligning around the customer's buying process so that you arrive at an agreed sign date perfectly synchronized. Again, we feel that's going to be a lot more challenging to do, because our view in the past has always been you work with your key contact in your proposal to help them organize their buying process, understand what their buying process is, understand what it is you need to provide them with to help them move forward. And that was always done by working together. Technology, and particularly things like Microsoft Teams, I think will help you do that. But it's going to become perhaps more important to really understand your client's buying process and align your sales process around their buying process. Don't expect them to do it the other way around. It will be a challenge. but do try and find a way to create that plan together with your prospect. The final element in this that we spoke about earlier was what we call win-loss reviews. In other words, something's happened, you've either won or lost a piece of business. It might be an unexpected result. Try and find out why. Try and find out what happened, what you did right, what you didn't do so well. Historically, we've always suggested for the key pieces of business, you actually went and did a face-to-face interview with the buyer's team to find out why. That again will become more difficult. It might be worth investing some time and effort in creating some form of digital, i.e. online survey that asks a very limited number of questions. Don't try and put 30 or 40 questions on there, but maybe half a dozen that will allow your either new clients or those who decline to do business with you to express in unambiguous terms why they bought from you or why they didn't. Our view being, it's certainly worth investing a bit of time now in creating that type of process. And I want to finish off with a summary. The first point really I said was process. I think it's going to be very important now for you to have, we call it a sales playbook, but it's just a process, a map, if you like, of understanding how you sell and what are the key pieces of technology, who does what. And we think that that's going to be very, very important as a roadmap for all those in your businesses to understand how to sell in the new world. Please treat this as a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's very rare that you will have the opportunity to sit down and say, the world has changed and I've got a little bit of time to create a whole new raft of processes. I was listening to an article on the radio yesterday saying that rather than the death of local businesses, this appears for those businesses who are forward thinking to have been a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I was listening to various articles about businesses who never had a web presence before, who've now created a web presence and are selling and actually doing far more business now than they ever were before, to the point where some of them are questioning whether they actually need a physical shop or a physical premise to run their business. So don't be disheartened. A lot of companies have been very successful. Bear in mind your competitors are facing a similar challenge as well. You're not on your own. Your competitors mainly will be facing exactly the same challenges. So don't feel that you're trying to play catch up. Just find a way of accelerating your advantage. Please do invest in technology. I know investment at the moment might be difficult, and it might not necessarily be you have to invest a lot. You know, Zoom, Skype, they're all available as an online service. But equally importantly, and I think the one area that people tend to forget sometimes is invest in understanding how to use that technology, which buttons to press, what are the features and functionality of the technology, and how that blends in with the sales skills. And by that, I'm talking listening, trying to understand and focus on how to look at people's body language. Please take time to do that. Many businesses have embraced this very successfully, particularly I have to say in the States, and I'm not necessarily advocating everything they do over there is right, but they do seem to have been ahead of the curve on that, maybe because of the geographic size, I don't know. Don't be afraid to ask for help. The guys at AGP have got, and the relationship managers have got an awful lot of contacts out there who I'm sure will be able to help you in any of the areas that you've asked for or that you identify you might need a little bit more knowledge on. I'll finish it off by saying just be bold, be brave, be different. It is a great opportunity. On that, Lisa, I'm going to hand over to you again.
Thanks, John. I know, apologies, we had a few sound issues at the beginning, I think, but every time I came off to mention it on mute, then it sorted itself out until the next time. So apologies for that at the start there. I know looking at the time now, some of you may need to shoot off, but if anybody does want to come off mute and have any questions or any comments that they would like to ask John, then please feel free to do so now. Oh, must have been such a marvellous presentation there, John. Everybody's okay then.
Well, I would say if anybody has any questions or wants to find out a little bit more about some of the points, then please, Lisa, I'm happy if you want to give out my email,
Okay.
and I will try and get back, or I can pick the phone up to people if required, because I appreciate that everybody's set maybe an hour aside. But yeah, I'm happy to get back to people as required.
No problem. And if anybody does want the details then just contact me. I'll be sending you out emails, obviously, so you can just reply to those there if there's any questions or you want to get in touch with John. That's fab. Okay, I think you're free to, whether it's your coffee or your alcohol, John. I'm not sure what you're having this morning.
Well, thanks.
You're hiding your camera, so I can't see.
But you think I'm on alcohol at this time in the morning?
It was you that was saying it this morning.
It'll be coffee.
Oh, okay then. Okay, thanks everybody for taking the time. Again, just a reminder, just to get those signatures back to me, that would be great. And if anybody wants copies of the slides, then I can do that as well, but we will need those signatures back. And again, if you want to be able to contact John, then let me know when I can pass his details on to you. So other than that, just have a good day, everybody, and thanks for coming.